Hey everyone, welcome to the YouTube channel of Connecting Minds. My name is Deepak, and in this episode, we will discuss on one of the most frequently asked questions in the entire GST law. And that is, when should you obtain a GST number? Or in other words, when should you obtain a registration under GST? Well, in episode 4 on the basic mechanism of GST, I did touch upon the concept of registration and also mention the fact that the liability to pay GST arises once you obtain a GST number. Well, if you haven't watched that particular video, I've given a link to the same at the end of this video. So therefore, in this episode, we will discuss about persons who are liable to get a registration under GST and persons who are not liable to get a registration. So let's take a quick look. So the basic question is, when should you obtain a GST number or get yourself registered under GST? Well, if I'm a supplier involved only in the supply of goods, and if the aggregate turnover in the financial year exceeds rupees 40 lakhs, then I have to get myself registered under GST. Or if I'm a supplier dealing in both supply of goods and services or only services, and if my aggregate turnover in the financial year exceeds rupees 20 lakhs, then also have to get a registration done under GST. So for only goods, the threshold limit is rupees 40 lakhs. For goods and services or only services, the threshold limit is rupees 20 lakhs. Let's say, for example, there is Mr. Rohit, who is involved in the supply of both computers and providing AMC services. The aggregate turnover of Mr. Rohit in the financial year is rupees 25 lakhs. And in this case, Mr. Rohit is liable to get himself registered under GST and obtain a GST number because one, he is supplying both goods being computers and services being AMC services, and number two, his aggregate turnover exceeds the threshold limit of rupees 20 lakhs. But what if Mr. Rohit is only involved in supply of computers? Then in that case, there is no requirement for him to get registration under GST because one, he is only dealing with supply of goods being computers, and number two, his aggregate turnover does not exceed threshold limit of 40 lakhs. From this understanding, there arises two questions. One, if yesterday I crossed the threshold limit of 20 or 40 lakhs, do I have to get myself registered and obtain a GST number today? Well, the law provides that you have a 30-day time period from the day you cross the threshold limits of 20 or 40 lakhs. So if on 16th October 2020, I cross 20 or 40 lakhs, then I have time up to 16th November 2020 to get a GST number or get myself registered under GST. The second question is, what do you mean by the term aggregate turnover? Well, to put in simple words, aggregate turnover is the total of all supplies liable to GST, all supplies exempt from GST, all export of goods and services, and finally, if your business has multiple units, then the turnover of all such units put together is aggregate turnover. Now let's discuss those cases in which there is no requirement for you to obtain a GST registration or get yourself a GST number. Number one, if you are involved only in the supply of goods or services which are exempt from GST, like selling fish or providing only educational services, then there is no requirement for you to obtain a GST registration. Number two, if you're an agriculturist and you're involved in the supply of the produce from your cultivated land, there is also no requirement for you to obtain a GST registration. And finally, if you're involved only in the supply of goods or services which are subject to reverse charge, there is also no requirement for you to obtain a GST registration. So what do you mean by the concept of reverse charge? Well, reverse charge is the mechanism under which the recipient or the person receiving goods or services is liable to pay GST directly to the government. Under normal circumstances, it is usually the supplier who will collect the GST from the recipient and then pay the same to the government. But under reverse charge mechanism, the recipient will have to pay that GST directly to the government. For example, let's say Mr. Rohit is now involved in supplying legal services to his client in Delhi. Now, legal service is a specific service which is included in the reverse charge mechanism, and therefore the client of Mr. Rohit will now be liable to pay GST directly to the government. So if you're involved in the supply of goods or services which are subject to reverse charge, then there's no requirement for you to obtain a registration under GST. Well, there are certain instances wherein even if your aggregate turnover in the financial year does not cross the threshold limits of 20 or 40 lakhs, you still will have to obtain a registration under GST and get a GST number. Well, what are those instances? Number one, if you're involved in the supply of goods or services or both from one state to another state, that is basically an interstate supply, then you must obtain a registration under GST. All e-commerce operators, be it Amazon or Make My Delivery, irrespective of the turnover in the financial year, must get themselves GST registered. If you're a recipient of goods or services or both, and you're liable to pay GST directly to the government under reverse charge mechanism, then you must obtain a registration under GST. And finally, persons acting as agents, undertaking the supply of goods or services or both on behalf of others, are also liable to get themselves registered under GST and obtain a GST number. Well, coming back to the example of Mr. Rohit, let's say now he is involved in the supply of both computers as well as providing AMC services within the state of Delhi as well as from Delhi to Chennai where his customers are located. The aggregate turnover of Mr. Rohit is now rupees 18 lakhs. The law says that even if his aggregate turnover does not cross the threshold limit of rupees 20 lakhs in the financial year, it is mandatory for him to obtain a GST registration now because he is involved in the interstate supply wherein he is supplying both computers and providing AMC services from Delhi to Chennai. Well, a common question being asked here is that what if you are liable to obtain a registration under GST but you fail to obtain one? Well, of course, there will be a penalty imposed on you, and the amount of penalty is rupees 10,000 or the amount of GST that you have evaded as a result of not obtaining registration under GST, whichever is higher. I hope I was able to make things clear through this particular video. If you liked the video, please do show your support to us by hitting that like button just below the video. If you want to become a member of this channel and receive notifications on a weekly basis as and when we upload these informative videos, please do hit on the subscribe button. And once you hit on the button, you have a bell icon on the side which you can tap to receive notifications at a faster rate. I've also given a link to my previous video on the income tax implications on the sale of land and buildings. So if you want to check out that video, please do click on the link. And yes, I would love suggestions coming in for this particular video by way of comments. And if you want to share your views or opinions on how GST law has fared in the country since 3 years of its inception, please do the same by way of comments. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Till then, it's a thank you from my side. Have a great day, and yes, stay safe.